Hello and welcome to Elemental Yarn. Today is another development journal update for my RPG project Tides of Ambition. Today I'm going to talk about the relationship and the difference between player characters and non-player characters. Tides of Ambition is a game that's about the player characters. It's about the story of the characters that your players portray. It's not about the ancillary NPCs that are wandering around. They also have an important role in the story. They have their own goals and ambitions and drives, and they'll come into the story and interact in different ways, and they'll provide conflict, and they may be allies to the player characters, but it's not about them. If it was about them, well then why not just watch a movie or read a book or something? No, Tides of Ambition is player-centric. And for that reason, the rules governing how player characters and non-player characters are different. They're not the same. One person pointed out in my very first video, they said something to the effect of, this system seems cool, but wouldn't it take a long time for the game master to roll, for all the NPCs to make all these rolls all the time? Seems like it would really slow things down. I agree with that. That would slow things down. And that's why it's not how it works. The way it works in Tides of Ambition is NPCs almost never roll. It's only ever the player characters, with some rare exceptions. So when you see an NPC stat block, you're not going to see dice listed. You're going to see values, with some modifiers here and there. For example, here's what an NPC stat block might look like in this game. Notice how this character sheet, this non-player character sheet, only has values and modifiers. There are some abilities in there as well, with a little symbol on there that I'll explain in a minute. But there's no dice because NPCs don't roll. NPCs are not the actors in the situation. They are not the ones who act. Or if they do, then you have the player roll in response to that action because the player character actions are the ones we care about. So, put this in perspective, let's look at an example. If a player makes an attack of some kind in a combat situation against an NPC, of course, they roll. And in this game, of course, you always roll 3 dice. So they're going to collect their condition die, their attribute die, and the relevant skill die, and roll all 3 at once to determine their result. If it's a straight roll, they use the middle number from the dice they rolled, or the highest with advantage, or the lowest for disadvantage. And then they compare that number, their result of the roll, against the NPC's defense value. So whenever you defend against an attack in this game, you can choose to either dodge or guard. If you choose to dodge, you're relying on your agility to avoid the attack altogether. If you're choosing to guard, you're standing firm and relying on the strength of your body or your armor or both to try and resist the attack and absorb it. There are pros and cons to each, and it depends on the scenario. But so basically, the NPC will choose whether it's going to try and dodge or guard before the roll is made, and then that's the number that the player is rolling against. If their result equals or exceeds the value they're rolling against, then they succeed and they hit the target and deal 1 damage. And keep in mind, in this game, 1 damage is a lot. The game is such that 1 damage always matters, as opposed to other games where 1 damage might be up against a creature with 500 hit points. That 1 damage ultimately probably will not matter. Now, let's look at the reverse scenario. The NPC retaliates, and on its turn, it will swing its weapon at the player character. Now, the NPC, remember, does not roll. It's the player's job to roll to avoid the attack against the attack value of the NPC. So, the player, much like the NPC, must choose whether to dodge or guard against the attack, and depending on their armor and their skills, that might influence which one they ultimately go with, but they'll collect their 3 dice and they'll roll against the attack value of the attacking creature, and if their roll equals or exceeds that value, they successfully avoid the attack. In the case of guarding, it's more like I said, you absorb the attack. So you take a little bit of stress, but you don't take damage. The benefit of that is you get to pass on some of that stress to your attacker. To determine the value of an NPC's action or reaction or something, what you do is you take the relevant attribute, which is a value. So for example, strength for this attack. And then you add a relevant skill. So skills in this way just add a +1 or a +2, sometimes a +3 to the value. Now, I'll be the first to say that Tides of Ambition is not the first game to use this kind of player-centric dice rolling mechanic. In fact, there are plenty of other games that do it. I think Numenera is one of them, where the players are the ones rolling, the NPCs simply have values. Now, what happens when an NPC absolutely has to roll? So typically, you only roll when there's a scenario in which usually a player character is attempting something in which the outcome is not obvious and there are interesting consequences for success or failure, and the GM is prepared for either direction. Those are kind of like the three main criteria you make when you're determining whether something requires a roll or not, or if the rules say you have to roll. But sometimes those criteria may apply to an NPC. Say you have an ally who attacks one of your enemies for you, or say there's an important NPC who's about to be crushed by some falling rocks and they need to dodge to the side. For a lot of scenarios, the GM can just do a coin flip or a random chance roll, but if it really does rely on an NPC's attributes or skills, you can figure out a way to do an NPC roll. Okay, so the way that you have an NPC make a roll for when you absolutely have to is you take what would have been their value, so their attribute plus their skill if there is one, and you multiply that by 2, and that becomes the die size that you roll. And you're only going to roll 1 die. Let's not overcomplicate things by having the GM have to collect a giant dice pool and figure out what the condition die is and everything. We're just going to break it down. We want to get through this as fast as possible and get back to the players driving the action rather than the non-player characters. So you multiply that by 2, and that creates your die size. Now, it is a minimum of D4 and maximum of D12. So, for example, if that character I talked about with the 3 in strength and the +2 in heavy melee, if you combine those into 5, multiply it by 2, they get to roll a D10. And then you would roll that and compare that result against whatever the target number is. And we don't really care about boons and banes for NPC rolls, at least not at this point. Those are more to mess with the player characters. Again, this game is not about NPCs. We don't want to make it about NPCs. We don't want to spend too much time at the table adjudicating how an NPC's result goes by several dimensions. We just want to figure out pass, fail, and kind of move on so we can get back to what the players are here for, and that's to play their characters. So let's get back to the action. Okay, and now one more thing I want to talk about in this video to kind of reinforce the relationship between player characters and non-player characters, aka the players and the GM, is a resource called luck. Now, the way luck works is the GM can award it to the players. It's kind of like hero points in Pathfinder. It's inspiration in D&D. It's fate points, I think, in Fate. Bennies, I think, in a system. So luck is a resource that the GM can award to the players. They can also generate it themselves with a few little game mechanics here and there. But for the most part, the GM can kind of award it out just for whatever they feel like, for good role playing, contributing to the story, like calling back to your backstory, or like, you could go Blades in the Dark style, like when you engage in your vice or something like that, or like really work hard in your virtue, whatever the case may be. So after you make a roll and discover your result, then you can choose whether or not to spend luck and how much luck you want to spend. So for example, say you make a roll and your result is 4, but you really needed a 6, you can spend 2 luck to increase your result from a 4 to a 6. Thus allowing you to potentially succeed at that task. Now, here's the rub. Whenever you spend luck, the GM gets that luck back, and they get it in their own pool of luck. It's kind of a tide that goes back and forth, right? Tides of ambition. So the GM uses luck a little bit differently. Rather than using it to, say, increase their values of challenges or NPC things, or to decrease the results of player characters, because that's not fun, the GM can use it to add banes to rolls. Now, this is important because banes are how enemy NPC abilities are often triggered. Let's take a look at this NPC stat block, the direwolf. I'll just read the quick little flavor text for this guy. A massive specimen of lupine kind that borders on the supernatural, with intelligent eyes and wicked teeth. So this direwolf is a powerful NPC. You'll notice it's called a sovereign. I'll go over that in a future video because this video is already getting kind of long, but suffice to say there are 3 kinds of NPC enemies: pawns, rooks, and sovereigns, and they each work a little bit differently. But again, I'll go over that in a future video. So those little diamond shapes with a dot in the middle, those represent banes. So for example, notice that the howl action says action/bane. So if you're the GM and the players are fighting a direwolf, then you can choose to either use this howl as an action on the direwolf's turn, or you can spend 2 banes to use it at any point during the round. So for example, let's say a player character who might even be across the battlefield, not even engaged with the direwolf, rolls 2 1s on one of their rolls. You can decide as the GM to spend those 2 banes to activate the direwolf's howl. Or you could use it for the regenerate ability at the bottom, which can only be activated using banes. So that allows you to remove 2 stress or 1 damage from the direwolf, because this thing, as I said, is a monster. So if you as the GM have some luck accrued, you can use that to activate these without even needing the players to roll ones. So you can choose how to spend them for whatever best fits the situation and the story and the narrative and whatever else is going on. So for example, if a player character goes up and attacks a direwolf and they miss and one of their dice rolls a 1, that means they have 1 bane. Well, if you have 1 luck to spend as the GM, you can spend that to elevate it to 2 banes and activate one of the direwolf's 2 bane abilities. Or you could try and trample to grapple the creature that attacked it and then immediately rip to do 1 damage to it. Keep in mind that, as I said, this is a very powerful creature. So they're going to have more abilities that trigger off of banes than weaker creatures, and they'll usually cost fewer banes to do so. So the weaker version of this creature, just the regular wolf, doesn't have the rip action available to it, doesn't have the regenerate ability available to it, and to trample, it actually requires 3 banes to do so. So you're kind of incentivized to make sure that it's the powerful creatures that you have to watch out for, because it's more costly to try and have the littler ones activate their powers. But that can still happen on its own. If a player goes to attack the wolf and rolls all 3 ones, even though it's a normal run-of-the-mill wolf, it can trample that character. I was very excited when I put this together and I realized this is how luck should work. And here's one of the main reasons why. What is the most interesting result? Just in general, when a player character tries to do something, what's the most interesting and compelling for the story in general? I posit that it is a success with a complication. That's why Blades in the Dark works the way it does. That's why it works this way in my game. Player success directly moves the story forward. Failure can too. It's a little trickier to implement that. For example, I failed to pick the lock. Okay, the story just kind of stops. There's nothing nudging things forward. It's just you're stopped dead in your tracks and you think, okay, well, I guess we got to find something else to do, which is fine, but it's not the kind of gameplay that I would like to encourage happening a lot. So players being able to spend luck to improve their frequency of success on important things is, in my mind, a good thing. It keeps things happening. We don't want things to not happen. We want things to happen. So that's one half of it. Now, the other half of it is with a complication, because just succeeding all the time and just coasting from success to success to success and nothing ever goes wrong, that's no fun either. That's not good for drama. There need to be complications. That's why when the GM spends luck, it doesn't make failure happen more often, it just makes bad things happen more often, even if the player succeeds. So with these two things coming together, I think we really start to reinforce the success with a consequence play model. And also, the fact that the luck goes back and forth between the players and the GM means that we've kind of got this luck economy going, and the decision of whether or not to use luck is actually interesting. For one thing, because it's a limited resource and you only have so much of it during the day. And for another thing, you know that when you spend it, the GM gets to keep that luck and use it later on. I do hope that that doesn't discourage players from ever using luck. And I think that really comes down to trust in your fellow players and your GM. And that's something I can't bake into the rules. I can't fix that kind of problem with a rule book. If you have a problem GM or problem players, no amount of rules is going to fix that situation. So if you have a GM who's very adversarial and tends to just unleash everything they have against the player characters and has the god complex and all those other RPG horror story elements about them, then obviously you're going to have problems. But I think for your average GM who's just wanting to tell a cool story with the players, I don't think this will be a huge issue. So I just hope that players wouldn't feel like, oh, I should never spend my luck. My GM's going to screw me over, because that's not desirable either. Obviously, this will all require playtesting, so I'm eager to see what the results are. Speaking of which, I actually do have a playtest document that is nearly ready. I plan on finalizing that within the next few weeks, maybe try to get some more playtests in myself before I release it from your playtests. But keep an eye out, because I want feedback. I'm going to start sending this out, maybe to select people at first, but eventually, yeah, I'm going to just release this, and then you can just download the game and play it. It's a free game. It might not be great yet. It might not be perfect. Or there's gonna be missing rules and like not a whole lot of features in some areas, but like you'll be able to play it. All right, that's enough for today's development journal update for Tides of Ambition. I'm going to stop myself before I keep talking for an hour and a half because that's what I like to do. If you have any feedback about the rules I presented in this video, go ahead and leave them in the comments below. I do read all of the comments, and it does give me some perspective to people's thoughts about the system. Go ahead and chime in with your own game design thoughts for your own games you're designing, or if you want to show examples of other RPGs you've played, go ahead and leave those in the comments as well. Everything helps. Honestly, this is really, really cool. I'm getting to collaborate in a lot of ways. Like maybe it's kind of one-sided or like disjointed somehow because you just kind of fling things at me and then I collect them and think, oh, these are nice. That was no good. That one's no good. This one's cool. But it's a fun process. So yeah, for sure. Go ahead and leave all your thoughts in the comments. I do read all the comments. Likes and views and shares and everything are great, but comments are really what helps me engage with you and see your thoughts directly, more so than just a number on a screen. So please, let me know what you think. Oh, and also, let me know what you want to hear about next for Tides of Ambition, and I'll be sure to take it into account and toss it into my hat of a million video ideas for my development journal. This has been Elemental Yarn. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. See ya.